Welcome to the first episode of Hustle to Harmony. This is going to be a very exciting journey. I'm really excited about our first guest, who ironically enough has been the first guest on the last two podcasts that I've started. I feel different about this one because this is the one that I am soul aligned with, and you'll learn more about that in the episode. But let me read you the intro to my good friend Allison. Welcome back to Hustle to Harmony. Today we've got an incredible special guest with us, someone who's truly redefining what it means to create success without the burnout. I'm thrilled to welcome Allison Crow to the show. Allison is a powerhouse in the coaching world with over 17 years of experience helping high achievers and business owners break free from hustle culture and embrace what she calls soul-aligned success. She's the creator of the self-leadership approach and runs a wildly successful practice where she coaches people not just in their businesses, but on their emotional alignment and personal freedom. What makes Allison so unique is her blend of no-nonsense business strategy with a healthy dose of spirituality and emotional awareness. She's all about helping people move from performing and proving to living fully in their truth. Her work is for anyone who wants to achieve incredible success without losing themselves in the process. So buckle up, because today we're diving deep into what it really means to lead with compassion, trust your inner guidance, and build a business that doesn't just look good, but feels good. And on a personal note, Allison has been a North Star in me building my coaching practice. She was one of the first people that I met that was willing to help me build my business. She's been a friend, a confidant, and someone that I really look up to throughout the years. So I'm really excited to share this episode with you. And without further ado, here's Allison Crow.
Sometimes good enough is good enough.
Well, I think a lot more times good enough is good enough, because some of us are like our 7, 8, 9 is most people's 3, like the over performative. And it's not about delivering less to the audience, but I've really taken, I didn't believe this, but a couple years ago, a therapist and then my psychiatrist both within a year mentioned, you're really hard on yourself. And I was like, what are you talking about, Willis?
What are you talking about, Willis?
But I pay them for feedback. So I listened and I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
That I call it quiet striving.
Yeah. That's quiet striving. That's interesting. I noticed,
right.
I turned 51 tomorrow.
Well, happy birthday.
Well, thank you. But with that, when I turned 50, it came with this flood of emotions of like, what the heck have I been doing? What are we even doing now? And now I'm turning 51. And I'm like, yeah, I don't give a shit. I don't care.
I asked my therapist, or not my therapist, my psychiatrist. I think sometimes when I go for my ADD med management, because it's a little bit longer appointment, I end up in a little bit of therapy. And he was like, oh, this is a normal psychology thing from old school psychology. And I felt a lot of relief. And because I told him recently, I haven't, in the past, I liked having a goal. I liked having something to go after. And you mentioned before we were recording, like the just being. And I told him, I said, I don't really know what I want to go after, what I want to, that part of me doesn't feel driven. And he said, and I said, I feel a little bummed about it. And he's like, that is very typical midlife, and let me get my words straight. Impossible ideals, which is something that I noticed the last 5 years of my clients who would come to the calls and they were holding themselves to these, whether it was parenting, work, these really high standards. This is the quiet striving, right? That you don't, because society says this is what you're supposed to do. And then you kind of loosen up and realize that's an impossible standard. And there's a little bit of melancholy or depression that comes with it. And he did say on the other side is this more, he didn't use the word being, but this more acceptance, and the joy comes back. And so I feel like I'm in the middle of that slow pendulum swing of, in the same way we were acclimating our tech and just kind of checking. And, it's like we could worry about the time, or we could just deal with the moment that's here, or meet the moment. And so meeting the moment of not having shame when, I don't wake up and know I'm going after some goal, and just being a little bit more, allowing a little bit more of the melancholy. I have an affection for that word because of my husband and his writing when he was a teacher, but that the melancholy isn't such a bad thing. It's in a realignment. And then you start shedding the things that don't matter, and you just enjoy the things that do with
Mhm.
uh, more chop wood, carry water. And
Yeah.
I guess to some people that's going to sound really depressing or miserable, but to me it's like, oh no, this is just meeting the moment and being here and doing the things I want to do and doing the things I need to do for my business. And
Yeah.
I notice I'm self-conscious about sounding so depressed.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think you and I are we always track in similar spots in life, every time we talk. And, I think that's why I wanted in this latest incarnation of the crazy things that I do. I was like, well, if I'm going to do another first one, I got to have you on as the first person, But I do think that's because anytime we connect, we're always tracking through similar phases. And I think, as you were talking, I was thinking like, what do I do when I go on vacation? I'm not really striving to be the perfect me or to get all the money or to get all the thing. Like, I just kind of want to sit there and be and absorb the sensations of wherever I am and experience and be present, and I was like, well, that's interesting that the rest of my life is in this tornado of more or better or different. And and then you get to an age where, I think I'm at now, is where just
Yeah, I
enjoy
just
that.
turned 53.
Yeah,
And for me, and probably for you too, the money is still a thing, right? Like
yeah,
I often do say that, if I had all this wealth, I don't want to say all the problems were solved, but a big portion is I still have to work. And I will have to work for a while. And I'm coming out of an unraveling of my identity being fulfilled with work and stepping back in. I didn't know that that was happening. I didn't know that I was building a business on what's called recognition response euphoria, which is the opposite of rejection, at the opposite end of the spectrum of rejection sensitive dysphoria, which are both traits of people with ADHD. And at 50, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and at 51, I was diagnosed with autism. And so the paradigm and the things I've struggled with and what's normal and what I'm it's this whole crock pot I've been slowly kind of unlearning and untying with my little engineer. Like, it's like taking apart a radio and figuring out how it works. And then now I'm in the place of, how do I want to put it back? But it's like an alcoholic walking into a bar. And recently I've shifted to, what would it look like if I continue to work in this business? And I do need to rebuild. I had the last 2 years were not enough financially for me, which was a part of the over, releasing. It's real easy to say you can, let me reduce the identity with business while you're still making a couple $100,000 a year. Like,
yeah,
part of that is the income. And it's time to rebuild and more conscious than ever. And it sounds like you too, is like, no, really, what do I want to create? How do I want to be with myself? What is my physical capacity? Because I've also had a lot of physical limitations. And just last week, I decided to stop praying for vitality and accept the energy I have.
wow,
Because it felt right. Like, love what I have. And if I have limited physical vitality and limited capacity, I have some lung issues going on, and I have had for 4 years. It's like, okay, quit holding myself to a past standard of me. And it doesn't mean I've failed. None of us None of us are 33 anymore.
Right?
Do
Right?
you do that? Do you see, I mean, I
Yeah.
know you're like, you and I are constantly evolving and creating and moving towards what feels good. And, I know you're raising a family and you've lost your mom, and real life hits us all.
Yeah.
And it's like all the little pieces inside the radio shift. And so it's not a static thing. It's not like, oh, let me get this business built and then we run it. I always say we're gardeners, not machines. And the climate changes, just like the climate does. In Texas this year, they're saying we're going to have puny bluebonnets because we didn't have enough rain.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, but it just is, right?
It
Like
just
that.
is. Yeah.
But that's the same with us. Is so.
Yeah.
There was something you were saying earlier, and I now have 3 things. Like, if your leaders aren't doing these 3 things and at least mentioning them, that's a red flag for me. And one of them is identifying, like, if they don't just at least acknowledge systems of oppression, they don't have to teach it, but that there are factors outside of us, right?
Sure.
Because I do think in the personal growth world, toxic individualism is actually physically harming us. We need each other. And there are all kinds of systems that are invisible, causing problems, and we're holding ourselves to this standard. The second one is nervous system and nervous system regulation. Again, they don't have to teach it, but it's really difficult to be in your creative flow when your nervous system is in fight or flight.
Mhm.
And the third one, what is the third one? I can't remember right now. These are all really important, but those 2 are biggies. Oh, self-trust, right? Like, if your leaders aren't pushing, the one thing I talk about, if your leaders aren't putting it back to you to say, and how does that feel inside of you? What's your version of it? If they're not getting you to trust yourself, right? Because I think so much of these systems of oppression teach us to source outside, and then we end up building a reliance on the weather, so to speak, right? Like, to follow the metaphor, right?
Yeah.
And then we're mad because our bluebonnets aren't as beautiful as they were the year before, but we couldn't control the rain. So
True.
yeah.
True. Yeah, I think one of the words that I hear you saying that kind of jogs my thought process is identity. And it's like, we think that once we have our identity, that it's an absolute. That's it. We found the thing. We found the thing we're seeking. And what we don't allow ourselves is the grace for our identity to evolve and change and even completely go somewhere different. And yeah, and I think that's the cycle of life. You and I, we're the same age, and I hit the same thing. I decided a few years ago I was going to be a long distance runner, ultra runner, and what do you think happened? Well, I got hurt, and that's because, a 50-year-old person who hasn't been very much a runner most of his life tries to do that. But what I did discover in that, and I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment, because I'm the guy. I went to Instagram. I was like, guess what I'm doing? I'm doing this amazing thing. And it was that recognition identity crisis that I went into. And then I was like, shit, now I got to tell them I'm not doing the thing because I can't. And who am I because of that? But then I think ultimately, through a process, what I found were things that I do love that are sustainable. Like, I found yoga, and I was like, I would have never done that, and I love it, and it's actually better for me than the other thing I was trying. And so I think there is this part of identity of who are you being in this phase of your life? Are you allowing that grace to, like you said, just let it be and let it happen? And I think you and I we could rap about this and jam on it for a long time, but I really want to talk about a lot of things with you, because anytime I get a chance to bend your ear, I value that time. But we are or I try to be. I think you do a beautiful job of being transparent about self-coaching sometimes, coaching yourself through challenges and things like that, but you also work with a lot of high achieving women, like some brilliant women in all aspects of life and business. And I think we are in a world now where a lot of people, because of whatever reason, could be politics, religion, energy, depends on, what you believe and where you're going. But a lot of people can feel stuck and burned out or trapped in some way. So when you're doing your work, like what do you see as a common reason or a common denominator between people feeling the way they feel? And it could be you as well.
Number one, holding themselves to capitalistic ideals. We are inundated, and I don't even want to call it, like in the spiritual world, we call it mass consciousness. I don't even want to call that. I very specifically want to call out American culture. And listen, I love making money, but I had to come to the distinction of commerce. And for me, the difference between commerce and capitalism involves the government and exploitation of people and resources. And so how do I participate in the buying and selling of goods and services without exploitation of my audience, of my client, of myself? Because that's where I did over pleasing, over functioning, and then doing my best. This one's the hardest for me because I am, I always sound so good and benevolent, but I got an Amazon problem, right? Like where I live, Amazon, I just put in an order today for some of the things that we need. And so I'm not going to deny that I'm still participating in exploitative practices, and I'm doing my best to, I don't know that any of us can unless we're going off grid. And so, and it's important to me to recognize I can participate in buying and selling and in marketing without exploitation of myself and my audience. Same thing with, when I'm paying, I don't have any help right now, but I've always paid my assistants a fair fee and those kinds of things. Those are important in my values. But what I see when I started tracking, so one of the things that happens is when I'm working with people and in the world, I don't just see the top line. I see 27 layers deep and wide. I've learned that that's called bottom-up thinking. It's one of the reasons it's like, very common for ADD, autistic, neurodivergent people. I don't think linear. Now, linear is a part of the thing, but I see all these other connections as well. And as I was listening to clients for the last 5 years, I just kept hearing these standards that were not from the person's heart or core. They were from an external pressure. And then I started just critical thinking, just exploring my own beliefs and exploring. So one of the things was with Amazon, when I need that on Amazon. So noticing that I have an impulse. And then 2, what am I craving? So instead of changing the behavior, I consider myself a behavior expert, actually, right? As a coach, we're coaching the behavior. And this was me 20 years ago as a productivity coach. Intrinsic motivation is what makes sustainable change. And we use so much shame-based external motivation, and then it leads to a big dip afterwards. So things like when I go for Amazon, to notice a little deeper, what am I craving? And so what my clients were craving and what they were pushing themselves to do were not congruent. And it would have to come up in the conversation, but it's like, they don't want you to have self-trust, because if you don't have self-trust and that self-compassion and that self-connection, like literal attunement connection, that's what I mean, like the nervous system, if we don't have that, if we're taught to trust even God outside of us, don't feel this way, trust God, get the opinion of everybody else on what your book cover should be. No offense, Hank Avink, right? But like, this is what we do. I
Yeah.
get that that's also a marketing thing, but right, like asking other people's opinions and instead of slowing down and trusting ourselves. If we don't trust ourselves, then we buy shit we don't need and they can control us. And there's a very specific scientific term called interoception. And interoception is the physio-psychological thing in a child. When we teach a child learns through interoception when they have to go to the bathroom, when they're hungry, when they're thirsty, right? When they're babies, they just pee in their diaper. And as they get older, combined with potty training from parents, we start to learn to recognize those internal senses and then the appropriate place to go to the restroom, let's say. And simultaneously, most of the people I have ever worked with in 22 years, so interoception is not just physical, it's also knowing, trusting your gut, trusting yourself. If you're upset about something as a little child and the parent said, I'll give you something to cry about, or go to your room, let me create separation when you're upset so we break the attunement. So these, and then in my world, a big one I'm realizing, like the most traumatic thing that was ever done to me was the culture of evangelicalism, honestly. And it did everything to get me to not source outside myself. And so that psychological skill wasn't developed. And we're all out here with our legs dangling. And those are skills that can be learned, but they really do need to be learned. And so we don't know how to emotionally process. We don't know how to hold difficult emotions. We don't know how to struggle and be safe. Like we take it to the polarizing, like if we're struggling, that's an absolute failure or there's shame involved.
Right.
And I know that's a lot, but those are a lot of the things I've been thinking about as I realign is how can I do this without impossible, externally exposed, listen, I will see something on TikTok and then I buy it. I'm easily influenced.
I mean, you're human after all,
Right. Well, yeah. And it's not either or. It's like, oh, what am I craving? No, you're actually craving this because you need this. And sometimes I put something in my Amazon cart that it's like, oh, you just want a little dopamine hit. Maybe take a quick walk and wait 24 hours. And if you still want it, then get it.
Yeah.
Same thing with drinking. I don't drink that much anymore, but for a while there, I was just like, what am I craving? Just checking in. Is this automatic? And is there something? And sometimes, I'm craving a glass of wine. And other times I'm like creating avoidance.
Yeah, or escapism or whatever. I heard someone this week say they were, talking about behavior. And I think that's, and they said what we're seeking when we binge eat, or if we have a snacking problem, the same thing that we're seeking with alcohol, the same thing we're seeking with binge eating, the same thing we're thinking with shopping. We're seeking the same thing, and it's a change of the breath, it's a change of the pattern of breathing, or it is the dopamine and all that stuff, and we feel really good sometimes, but it is that all of those behaviors produce the same thing, and it's in some way. And it was a very fascinating argument that they were presenting. And I was like, I never really thought of it that way. But then I started thinking of my own life, and I was like, well, it's true. Like when I go shopping, I feel abundant. I feel, look at me out here doing these fancy things. And then same when I have a glass of wine, I feel, I'm relaxing now. This is a relaxing time. Same when I'm eating good food. And so it's really fascinating. It's funny you brought up that, because I had an interaction with my son this week. We have a little table that kind of snugs right into our couch, and we have a beige couch. It's very neutral room. That's how we like it. And I actually had a glass of wine, and I put it on that little table, and he was being a 10-year-old boy. And I said, Bax, watch your feet, because my wine is right here. it wasn't 2 seconds later, he kicks the wine over on the couch.
Mhm.
And I reacted. I didn't yell at him, but I did let him know that that's why I told you not to do that. And then we got it all clean. But he created separation by going to his room, and I didn't send him to his room. And
Mhm.
I recognize that. I'm very proud of this, by the way. It's the only reason I'm talking about it.
Yeah, it's a
I
big
went.
deal. It's a big deal.
It is, but I went
Yeah.
to his room and I sat with him and I said, "Hey, we made a mistake. Dad makes mistakes, you know." And then I started, after the fact, I started thinking like I wouldn't have gotten that. I got the rub some dirt on it, you know, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. I didn't get how to process these emotions of I made a mistake. What do I do next? It was
Mhm.
either don't make a mistake or you're a failure. You're completely unacceptable. Um, I think I grew up in the church. I think the church presents that. If you do this list of things, you're completely not getting into the club,
Mhm.
right?
And yeah, core trauma beliefs. Mine was, I had two, like one was the apocalypse and being left behind, but the other one is being in third grade, showed some video of Lot's wife who, you know, Sodom and Gomorrah is burning down. And there's this visual representation of they're not supposed to look back. And Lot's wife looks back and she turned into a pillar of salt. And then the pillar of salt disappeared. And that is my core wound.
Wow.
Like that is the deepest like it took me a while to get that, but you know, when I would be like, and what else, and what are you afraid would happen, and what are you afraid would happen, through lots of therapy. um let me let my dog out so he doesn't make noise.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, good boy. Same thing, right? And my mom asked, well, why didn't you tell me this was happening at school? I was a child. You were
Right.
a child. We believe these things, and I don't know about you, but I loved school. I
Yeah.
loved my teachers. And I don't think my teachers had any concept that what they were teaching, they didn't know that that was damaging to me, but I did internalize that.
Yeah.
That if I didn't behave a certain way, then this unconscious sense of disconnection. And there was a video I saw when I did a training with Gabor Mate. It's called the Still Face Experiment. There's a handful of them on YouTube. This one is about 2 minutes and 44 seconds. And it shows this 9-month-old baby. So she can't talk yet. Her mother's there. This ends safely. And I show it to all my new clients. I show it to all my existing clients quite often. I talk about it a lot. And so the mothers, they're goo goo gaga with the baby and they're playing and just interact. They're attuned, right? They're connected.
Mhm.
And then the mother turns her head as a part of the experience. And when she comes back, so she is physically there, but she turns it off. No bad face, just a neutral face. And immediately the first thing the baby does is try to re-engage with pleasing, like, remember, you know, and it's a pleasing affect. And when that doesn't work, the baby then starts getting frustrated and fight or flight. So the first one is fawning, pleasing. The
Mhm.
second one is frustration, flight. And then the third one, as time goes on, the baby starts to fold into itself. And as soon as that happens, the mother reconnects her energy with the baby. So they don't let it go fully into this folding state. And I was like, oh my God, that's the Crow kids. People pleasing, fawning.
Right.
Kids number 2 and 3, that disconnection there was long enough that those are the two fighters. And the fourth child completely turned in, right? Those are nervous system states.
Wow.
Trying to regain attachment.
Yeah. Wow. That's
That end up being adult coping behaviors. And for those of us that are fortunate enough to not choose these super destructive behaviors, we're choosing coping mechanisms that are rewarded by society, but that aren't always healthy.
yeah. That's amazing. I can see that. You know, and I was thinking about this. I was thinking about my mom. You know, she passed in 21. But I was like, she did the best she could, but there was a lot of things in there that she didn't even know she was doing that I'm dealing with
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
you know, and,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it is that kind of stuff of, you know, where do you find your value? You know, I know you talk a lot in your work about soul alignment, emotional alignment, and really aligning, you know, where do we go from here? Like,